It's been said that there are only 7 stories in the world, and that every movie, TV show, video game, and book we love follows one of those plot points. I'm not sure I believe that at all, but I do think that there is a right way to tell a story and a wrong way. And today, I'm joined by author and award-winning screenwriter Geoffrey Calhoun to discuss what makes a great story. This is Tatooine Sons.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the Porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that Porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody was lit.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and be endorsed by the writer-director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation. There is a story. It is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by Geoffrey Calhoun. Geoffrey is the best-selling author of The Guide for Every Screenwriter and host of the Successful Screenwriter Podcast. Now, as a screenwriter and founder of We Fix Your Script, he is sought out as a script consultant and a rewriter for various stages of development and production. Geoffrey is known for his fast-paced thrillers, but he's also won awards for comedies and dramas. He's received honors in several film festivals and contests, including the Lewis Mitchell Award for Excellence in Writing. He believes everyone is a writer at heart and has dedicated himself to help others learn their craft. And his seminars are designed to break down the mysteries of screenwriting by using easy-to-follow templates, outlines, and modern popular films as examples. Now, I'm always fascinated by why certain stories like Star Wars capture our imagination while others are easily forgotten. I asked Geoffrey, what makes a story compelling?
Well, it's an interesting point. So I also want to mention that Star Wars really has gone beyond science fiction and has become a part of Americana. It really is this pulp culture icon that is related to what we experience daily lives. So, but what separates a good story from like really big action blocks and why films are going bigger and bigger is actually probably not an answer that you suspect. So what's been happening over the past 20 years or so is that audiences have been educated on plot points and the hero's journey to the point to where audiences aren't really surprised anymore. They kind of expect what's going to happen next. And so to make up for that, studios have been pushing bigger and bigger budgets into the billions to try and create what we call spectacle to really grab people and keep them in the seats, keep them interested in these films. Now, what you're finding, especially post-pandemic, is that audiences really aren't so interested in these big blockbuster films like they used to be. People don't need to be awed as much as they want to be involved in a story with a character that they find interesting, which is why you're finding smaller budget films such as the one with the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix was a big hit. It wasn't a huge spectacle, special effects glory. It was about a guy who had mental health issues, and the system failed him, and the results of that, and people were fascinated by it. That story didn't have to be about the Joker. It still would have been a hit if it was just about a normal guy, but they put the IP on top of it, and then they were able to tap into the fan base as well. So what I think you're going to find more and more popular nowadays is what we call a low concept film, which is one that is more character centered. Whereas these high concept films are the ones that are these blockbuster special effects extravaganzas.
It reminds me of so my youngest son, Nate, he's 16. He is a DC Comics freak. He loves everything about comics, and his favorite character in the world is Batman. And he is really excited about the Matt Reeves, Robert Pattinson Batman that's getting ready to come out next March. And I think it's somewhat because of what you just described when you compare it to the Joker, or when you mention the Joker, because that one seems to be a little bit lower budget and it's a much more character driven story.
Right. I think I'm really interested to see how audiences take it. I mean, because Robert Pattinson has been, pigeonholed with the whole Twilight saga, and he's got a lot of hate from the community because of that. But I am very curious to see where they go with it, because if it is successful, then that really will be the linchpin of where films are going to be going for the next decade or so.
Let's go back to Star Wars for a minute, because one of the criticisms that I've heard levied against the sequel trilogy is that it misses the mark when it comes to some of those big plot points, like the hero's journey type stuff that Joseph Campbell. What are your thoughts on the sequel trilogy and how they tried to tell the stories with that? And did they miss the mark on that?
I think one of the issues is that you have a couple of different directors with different visions. And so J.J. Abrams had a very specific vision for 7 through 9 that he wanted. He did 7, executed it in that way. And then 8 came out but from a different director and almost had like a soft reboot on 7. And then 9 came out, which almost had like another, like a soft reboot of 8. So you could almost watch the films and see the directors arguing, even though they go on record and they say they get along, which I believe, which is fine. I don't believe there's any bad blood there. But I think when you have a director who's got this idea for a trilogy and then someone comes in, does their own thing, and then they have to come back to the original director, there is going to be some inconsistencies there. So I found that really fascinating. That being said, I think I would like to compare The Force Awakens to the new Ghostbusters film that just came out, Afterlife.
Right.
So both very similar takes where they're trying to capture the nostalgia of the original while going in the same direction. Now, the argument I've heard about The Force Awakens is, it's just a complete reboot, and they're basically just copying episode 4. I would say the big problem that trilogy had, compared to how Afterlife was an incredible success, is the big twist that was the big secret of Rey's lineage. The fact that we don't know her lineage and she is just a random Force-sensitive person living in the desert similar to Luke actually kind of hurts the film because we don't understand what's going on. And then the supporting characters were kind of plugged in afterward to bring in that original trilogy nostalgia. Now, the difference with how they executed it in Afterlife is that the central character is directly related to Egon, right? So it's the granddaughter of a central character that we all love from the past, so that the nostalgia is there and the torch is carried. And I think that is the big difference that missed. Had we known Rey's lineage ahead of time, we wouldn't have had the big twist, but we would have at least had a little bit more of a tie there to the original trilogy, which they might have been able to hook their emotions of the viewers even more if she knew ahead of time that she had the potential for evil and then was following through with that and battling that the entire trilogy instead of more in just the last episode.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the the different visions J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson had, and then Colin Trevorrow before he was removed from the project and J.J. came back and finished it, it makes me even more impressed by the Marvel universe, especially when it comes to, leading from Iron Man all the way to Endgame, because there's multiple different directors, multiple different writers, and yet they're able to work together to tell a story. Have you ever been in a situation or have seen collaboration on that level when it comes to screenwriting or anything like that? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's a great question. And I can tell you why Marvel works so well, why DC has struggled, and what Star Wars is doing in television and why it's working. So what Marvel has done is each film that comes out in the Marvel universe is a different genre. That's why it's working. So if you have like Ant-Man and the Wasp, essentially is a heist film. Right. So Ant-Man is a heist because he's a thief. Right. You've got Thor Ragnarok, which came out. That was a comedy. Right. So, Black Widow is an action spy thriller, as well as Captain America Civil War, and then the original Captain America was essentially a World War II film. So they all have their own genres that they focus on. And what that does is it infuses a new type of blood into that superhero film, which allows them to play around with the characters more and be more authentic to who those characters are. Whereas what DC struggled with was for so long is that they just kept trying to redo the tone of The Dark Knight. And that's why it wasn't working. It's like, because we've already seen it. They weren't being really original to the characters until you have Aquaman come in, and then Wonder Woman, with both took their own different spins on it, which was original. Now that's what Star Wars is doing with television. And this is why it's working. The Mandalorian is not a Star Wars show. The Mandalorian is a Western. It's a Western in the Star Wars universe. And the fact that they're able to make that work is why it's so interesting. And they're going to keep doing that. The Book of Boba Fett's coming out. I'm hoping Ahsoka will have her own type of genre that they're working on. So if they keep working in different genres, it keeps it new and fresh for the audience.
The last couple of weeks have illustrated what Geoffrey just described. Hawkeye isn't really a traditional superhero show. It's a classic buddy cop story set around Christmas. And after watching Chapter 1 of the Book of Boba Fett, it seems that this series may be departing a bit from the Western theme of The Mandalorian to become more of an organized crime drama. My interview with Geoffrey will continue in just a moment, but I want to take just a minute to thank our sponsor, Cufflinks.com. The main nerdy topic of conversation in this house over the past week has been all about Boba Fett, and I just went over to Cufflinks.com to check out all of the amazing Boba Fett accessories on the site, and I just have to say, they are absolutely stunning. My favorite is the 3D Boba Fett cufflinks, and you got to go over and check them out. If you're not familiar with cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items, including cufflinks, ties, tie bars, and socks from all the fandoms that you love, like Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel and DC and Lord of the Rings and many more. We love cufflinks.com because they're owned and run by a couple of brothers who geek out about Star Wars as much as we do. So if you want to help the show out and you want to look great doing it, head over to cufflinks.com, take a look at everything that they have to offer, and then make sure you use the code Tatooine15 at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. There are so many cool pieces over there, and again, way more than just Star Wars. But anyway, as I continued my interview with Geoffrey, I asked him why, as a screenwriter, he thinks Eternals didn't really connect with audiences. His answer is fascinating.
No, I think it's a great question because I watched the Eternals and you know, the thing is, it hits every plot point. It does. It hits every single plot point, but the problem is we're struggling to find the heart of the story. So as we're following the central character, we want to feel for the central character, but we never really hit that heart of the story with them. And they tried to push it from different angles, and it just never landed. One of the issues is because there are so many different characters, so you don't really get to see the characters falling in love as much as they want you to think you do, because they're 4,000 years old and they're leaping through time in so many different ways that the story isn't grounded in the ways it needs to be. If you compare that to something like Guardians of the Galaxy, where you really care about these characters, you feel the heart in there, right? You care about Star-Lord. The fact that he's got a little comedic twist makes him stand out. And then the fact that he falls in love with this other character, and you see it and it comes through fruition. Well, these characters are 4,000 years old. The relationships are already there, and you're not feeling the chemistry in the way that we really want it to be.
There are some amazing filmmakers like Martin Scorsese and Denis Villeneuve and Ridley Scott that have been very critical of the MCU and Marvel and that type of storytelling.
Right.
Are there criticisms warranted?
I think it's interesting, because I think Ridley Scott, he is my favorite director, all the way from The Duelists way back in the 70s. I love his stuff. Every scene in a Ridley Scott movie could be on canvas. It's just absolutely beautiful and so well written. Raised by Wolves on HBO Max is an incredible show that he did. And his main complaint is that the modern education of the audience is not going to theaters and instead on the small screen is why films are hurting. And I think that's an interesting argument, because if that was true, then Quibi would have been a huge success. And it wasn't. It failed. Quibi's whole thing was to bring the theater to your pocket so that you could, they would shoot films twice. They'd shoot it in regular, and then they would shoot it specifically for your phone, so that you when you watched it, you didn't miss anything. It didn't get cropped out. And it was a huge failure. They lost. They weren't even able to find anybody to buy the company the last time I checked. So then it comes down to, why aren't people going to the theaters? And I don't think it's because of cell phones. I think YouTube is huge, especially with this new generation, our kids' generation. YouTube is their theater. Like when we were kids, I'm sure you were probably like this too. We would go to the theater and that was our escape. Theater was my church as a child. These kids aren't like that. These kids, it's YouTube. YouTube is their escape, and it's accessible anywhere. So then it comes down to, are we able to create content that these kids can digest in that type of a platform, but on the scale of a film? They're looking at doing it. I know studios and I know producers right now that are actively looking at creating content that they can capitalize, almost like mini short form versions of films that they can string together, like a glorified version of the web videos that we used to watch like 10 years ago. So I think that's interesting. I think the convenience of having Amazon Prime at home and watching it on your big TV is pretty awesome. I love to cuddle up and just rent a movie. So I think generationally, yes, things are changing. And I think he's absolutely right about that. Will theaters still be around? I think so. But I don't think they're going to be like they were back in the day. I think it's going to be more like bowling alleys. You used to have a bowling alley on every street corner. They're still around. They're not around as much, but the ones that are around are the ones that provide a huge premium service. And we have a local theater chain here called Imagine Theaters, which does pretty well because they have heated seats, they recline, they bring their food to you. I think those theaters that stick around are the ones that really cater to you, make going out the special experience it should be.
Do you think that the style of movie or the type of movie is going to be a big part of that as well? I was listening to another podcast yesterday, and John Roca was on there with my friend Pete, and they were talking about the sort of the mid-level and small films, some of the more character-driven films even that you're talking about, kind of like The Last Duel. They were acted with in the context of that. Those types of films can be consumed on that 70-inch television through HBO Max or whatever at home and still have the same general experience, maybe even better by watching it at home versus, in a few weeks, we're going to have Spider-Man No Way Home and it's going to be packed theaters and everybody's going to be freaking out. Do you think that the packed theater type experience for the big film where everybody's, it's an event, is what will become what the theater is for going forward?
I know theaters do that right now, which is really a great idea. They will create special events around old films or even live broadcasts of sports. I mean, they will create community events to really drive people to the theater and bring people together as well. And I think that's a great idea. I think big movies like No Way Home, sure, there will be an initial event, sure, and they will all go for that. But then in a couple of weeks, there'll be 3 people in the theater. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. It's not like it was when Avatar came out and every showing was sold out every day for a year and a half. It's not going to happen. You're not going to see that now. The world is different, and for the industry to move forward, they have to start changing their business model, and you're starting to see that now.
So is that where these films are going to be geared towards streaming services, HBO Max, Prime, Netflix, that kind of thing? Is that where it's going, where filmmaking is headed?
I think filmmaking is always trying to find its footing and find its next big VHS outlet. I went VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. I mean, I think it's always trying to find it. Right now, what you're seeing with indie films, what you're talking about, streaming services are taking indie films, that whatever films they can, and then putting them out there. But the problem is, and this started with like Netflix. Netflix took any indie film they could get because they didn't have films. And so then you could watch all kinds of quality films, from really, really great indie films to pretty low budget. How did this get on TV? And then Netflix created their own content and they said, we don't need you anymore. And they canceled those contracts. So then Amazon Prime started. It was behind the ball. So then they opened up the doors and was a huge proponent of indie films for about 5 years. They were paying really well. You had people that were doing entire marketing strategies just around Amazon Prime. Then again, they filled their library with their own content and canceled contracts, or at least reduced the payments to the point to where indie filmmakers can't make a dime anymore. So now you're seeing indie filmmakers going to a new streaming service like Tubi, where Tubi is taking all kinds of indie stuff. They're tending to take more high quality indie stuff, which is good. And people are getting paid that way. So that's right now what is going on, because the industry is in flux, is trying to figure things out. These indie filmmakers are just trying to go to whatever platform they can that will get a broad audience in front of their film and get them paid. Eventually, I assume Tubi will make enough in a few years from now to where they have their own content. And then yet again, the indie filmmaker will be struggling to find a new platform.
So as a screenwriter, there has to be a film that, or I would assume there's a film that you watched growing up at some point, and that was when you said, I've got to do this. I've got to write these types of films. What was that film?
Oh God, I wish I could say it was when I was a kid. I came to screenwriting late.
Okay,
I was about 22 to 20, maybe 20, 25 years old is when I said, I'm going to start. Well, actually, it was Gladiator. I saw Gladiator and I cried so hard. It was such a beautiful film. And it blew my mind, and it just sat with me. I mean, I love Star Wars. I saw Episode 6 in the theater when I was a kid, and it was a big moment for me. So I've always loved movies, but Gladiator was like one where I was like, wow, this has changed me as a person. And I felt that power, and I had started writing. I took a friend up on a bet to write a screenplay. So I wrote one, and my wife ended up reading it, and she loved it. And that was 20 years ago. And I've been doing it ever since.
If someone were toying around with the idea of becoming a screenwriter, what films should they watch in order to really understand the story and the plot points and that kind of thing? Or do you direct them, or is it just, whatever is on their heart and how they want to write?
Well, like we said earlier, if you want like the monomyth in story form, episode 4 is great. A New Hope is going to show you exactly where all the beats land. Traditionally, screenwriters will say like, Casablanca, Chinatown, things like that. You can watch them, sure. They're good. They're a little bit slower because it's a different pace back then. But really, watch a film and pay attention to how you feel during that film. If you watch a movie and it moves you, if you laugh, if you get sad, if you're invested, that is a film that I would say go find the screenplay and read it. On the successfulscreenwriter.com, the website for my podcast, I have Oscar-winning screenplays that you can read and pull up, like the Black Panther. I have that screenplay. You can read it for free, and that's a powerful film. So, like, you could read that screenplay and really see how it's done in the written form, and realize how much it really does translate in your mind's eye.
So this show is in its 5th year now. It's hard to believe for us.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And it started out as exclusively Star Wars. And so when we have a guest on that obviously has a big Star Wars love, as I'm looking at your background and seeing all the amazing Star Wars stuff there, I love to end every interview with people like that with this question. For you, how does Star Wars inspire hope?
That is a great question. It's about the light over the darkness, man. It's a classic tale of good versus evil, but really what gets down to the theme of Star Wars, which I think speaks to people even whether they realize it or not, is that there is greatness within you. There is that hero within you. You just have to tap into it and trust in the Force. And so I think that, to me, is something that always really, really moved me. And I think it's a beautiful message that you can pass along.
That's awesome. I love Geoffrey's answer to that last question, because it speaks to something that I believe is really important for us to understand. There is greatness within each of us. But I want to take that a step further. The greatness only exists because we were created by a God who designed us each with a very specific purpose. I'm reminded of the words God spoke to the young boy who would become one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament, Jeremiah. He said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart." Every man, woman, and child was created by a God who has a plan for their lives. Each of us has a destiny. And I want to thank Geoffrey for joining me this week. Make sure you check out Geoffrey's show, The Successful Screenwriter Podcast, and his book, The Guide for Every Screenwriter. To learn more about Geoffrey, just go on over to thesuccessfulscreenwriter.com. And thank you again so much for listening to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. If you enjoyed this interview, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app of choice, especially if you're a Spotify listener, since they've just opened that up for you guys. Make sure you hit the follow or subscribe button on your app so that you get every episode the moment it drops. Our next episode will release this coming Tuesday. We'll be reacting to Chapter 1 of The Mandalorian, and then taking a little look at Season 4 of Cobra Kai, at least as much of it as we've gotten a chance to watch. And then we'll be previewing Season 2 of Superman and Lois. I'm excited about that. Make sure you follow Tatooine Sons on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Share this episode with somebody else. That's the way that you help this show grow. That's going to do it for this episode. There's only one thing left to say.
May the Force be with you always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.